I'm Rhonda, 57 years old, and the proud mother of my only son, Jake. From the moment my son introduced Heather to me, I felt like I had gained a daughter. I was so excited to be part of their wedding planning, having saved for years to give them the perfect day. But I never expected to hear those cutting words that changed everything. If you are watching this, let me know where you are from. In the comments, hit that like button and subscribe to hear how this wedding drama unfolded. After losing my husband when Jake was only 12, I dedicated my life to giving my son everything he needed. Being a single mom was never easy, but I managed to build a successful small bakery while raising Jake on my own. Those years were tough but fulfilling. We developed a special bond that only strengthened as time passed. My little bakery, Sweet Comforts, started as a small operation, but gradually grew into a beloved local establishment. I worked long hours, often taking Jake with me after school, where he would do his homework at a corner table. Those memories are precious to me. Jake grew into a wonderful young man. Now 32, he works as a software engineer for a tech company in the city. He has always been kind-hearted and thoughtful, though sometimes I noticed he struggled with being assertive, especially in difficult situations. After losing his father at such a young age, Jake became protective of me in his own way, but also relied on my guidance more than most sons his age. Before meeting Heather, Jake had a few relationships, but nothing serious. I remember how he would bring his girlfriends home for dinner, always looking to me for approval. When Jake first mentioned Heather, there was something different in his voice. Heather, 29, works in marketing for a large corporation. She comes from a well-to-do family with connections throughout the city. Her parents, William and Patricia, own several successful businesses. Jake met Heather at a company event where their firms were collaborating on a project. He told me how she impressed him with her confidence and ambition. Their relationship moved quickly, and within 8 months, Jake was bringing her home to meet me. My first impression of Heather was positive. She was beautiful, articulate, and seemed to make Jake happier than I had seen him in years. She complimented my home, asked thoughtful questions about my bakery, and even brought a bottle of wine as a gift. I remember thinking how lucky Jake was to have found someone so put together. Little did I know what lay beneath that polished exterior. The wedding fund was something I had been building for years. As a small business owner, I didn't have much extra, but I faithfully put aside a portion of the bakery profits every month. By the time Jake and Heather got engaged, I had saved $45,000. This money represented countless early mornings mixing dough, late nights decorating special orders, and years of careful budgeting. It wasn't just money to me. It was a labor of love, a tangible representation of my devotion to my son's happiness. I had dreamed of the day I would tell Jake about this fund. In my mind, I pictured his surprised face and the emotional hug that would follow. I imagined how this money would help them start their married life without the burden of wedding debt. The thought of contributing to their perfect day filled me with joy and purpose. When Jake announced his engagement, I knew the time had finally come to reveal my years of saving. In the beginning, Heather and I got along wonderfully. She would come over for Sunday dinners and we would spend hours in the kitchen. I shared my treasured family recipes with her, including my grandmother's secret apple pie that had won county fairs for 3 generations. Heather seemed genuinely interested, taking notes and asking questions about techniques. She praised my bakery, constantly telling me how her colleagues raved about the birthday cake she had brought from my shop. Those early days felt like I was gaining a daughter rather than losing a son. The proposal happened during a vacation they took to the coast. Jake called me immediately after Heather said yes, his voice trembling with excitement. When they returned, I hosted a small celebration dinner at my home. I invited a few close family friends who had watched Jake grow up. During the toast, I announced the wedding fund I had been saving. The look of surprise and gratitude on Jake's face was everything I had hoped for. He hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you, Mom," in my ear. Heather seemed genuinely touched as well, giving me a warm embrace and saying how much it meant to them. Looking back, I can pinpoint when things began to change. It started with small comments about my home decor. "These curtains are a bit outdated, don't you think?" Or, "Have you ever considered updating your kitchen cabinets?" At first, I brushed these remarks off as youthful opinions. Then came the declined invitations. Heather suddenly had work commitments when I invited them for dinner. She would ask Jake to pick up desserts from my bakery rather than coming in herself. When I offered to teach her my holiday cookie recipes, she said she was trying to cut back on carbs. I tried to ignore these small rejections, telling myself that Heather was busy with her career and wedding planning. Jake seemed oblivious to these changes, or if he noticed, he didn't mention them. I didn't want to create tension, so I kept my concerns to myself. After all, relationships take work, and I was determined to build a good one with my future daughter-in-law. The first meeting with Heather's family was an eye-opening experience. They invited us to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind with white tablecloths and waiters who describe each ingredient as if reciting poetry. William, Heather's father, ordered expensive wine without consulting the table and spoke loudly about his recent business acquisitions. Patricia, her mother, wore designer clothes and jewelry that probably cost more than my monthly bakery revenue. Heather's brother attended an Ivy League school and made sure to mention it at least 3 times. Throughout the evening, they asked Jake detailed questions about his career and prospects, but showed little interest in learning about me. When I mentioned my bakery, Patricia simply nodded and changed the subject. At one point, William asked if I had any plans to sell the shop and retire soon, as if my business was just a hobby. Jake sat quietly occasionally, giving me sympathetic glances, but never stepping in to redirect the conversation or highlight my accomplishments. I left that dinner feeling small and insignificant, wondering if this was how it would always be. As the engagement celebration faded, wedding planning began in earnest. Heather suggested we all meet at her parents' house to discuss initial ideas. I arrived with a notebook full of thoughts and suggestions, excited to be involved in this special process. I had spent hours researching venues and vendors in our area, hoping to contribute meaningfully to the planning. During that first meeting, I suggested hosting the ceremony in my backyard garden. Over the years, I had transformed it into a beautiful space with a rose arbor, flowering trees, and a stone patio. Many family celebrations had taken place there, including Jake's high school graduation party. It would be so meaningful, I explained, and we could put the money saved towards your honeymoon or a down payment on a house. Heather's response was polite but dismissive. "That's a sweet thought, Rhonda, but we're looking at proper venues. We want something that can accommodate our guest list." The way she said proper made my suggestion seem childish and inadequate. Jake remained silent, his eyes darting between us uncomfortably. As a professional baker, I naturally assumed I would make their wedding cake. This wasn't just about saving money. It was about contributing something personal and meaningful to their celebration. I had already started sketching designs, imagining an elegant 3-tiered creation featuring my signature vanilla bean cake with raspberry filling, the same flavor Jake had requested for every birthday since he was 10. When I brought up the cake, Heather didn't even try to hide her dismay. "Oh, we couldn't ask you to work on your son's wedding day," she said, though her tone suggested different concerns. Later that week, she texted photos from Lux Confections, the most expensive bakery in the city. Their cakes started at $15 per slice. "We've already booked a tasting," the message read. Jake called later to explain that Heather wanted something more modern than my traditional designs. The implication that my work was outdated stung deeply. The guest list became another battlefield. I had prepared a list of 50 people, family members who had known Jake since birth, neighbors who had helped us after my husband died, and longtime customers who had watched Jake grow up in my bakery. People who had meaningful connections to our lives and who had supported us through difficult times. When Heather returned her revised list, she'd cut more than half of my guests. "We need to keep numbers down," she explained. "This day is about us starting our life together, not revisiting your past." Jake called to deliver this news, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge Heather's decision. I swallowed my hurt and accepted the cuts, though each deleted name felt like erasing a piece of our history. The venue debate reached its conclusion when Heather announced they'd booked Mountain View Resort, a luxury destination 2 hours outside the city. She hadn't consulted me before placing the deposit. The base package alone cost $30,000, not including catering, decor, or bar service. When I expressed concern about the price, Heather casually mentioned that her parents were contributing, but still expected my wedding fund to cover the majority of expenses. "Jake and I really love this place," she said, showing me professional photos of manicured grounds and ballrooms with crystal chandeliers. "It's exactly what we've dreamed of." Looking at Jake's face, I wondered if it was really his dream too, or if he'd simply learned to adopt Heather's vision as his own. As the planning continued, I found myself increasingly sidelined. Decisions were made without my input, then presented as final. I was included in group texts about logistics, but rarely asked for my opinion. When I did offer suggestions, they were acknowledged politely, then ignored. Jake seemed to notice my withdrawal, but attributed it to me being busy with the bakery. In reality, I was trying to protect myself from further disappointment. At night, alone in my house, I would sometimes cry, mourning not just my diminished role in the wedding, but what it signified about my future relationship with my son and his wife. I had always imagined being close to my daughter-in-law, sharing holidays and family traditions. Now I was beginning to fear I'd be kept at arm's length, invited to family gatherings out of obligation rather than desire. The meeting with the wedding planner marked the turning point in our relationship. Heather had hired Elise, a well-known planner who specialized in luxury weddings. We gathered in a downtown coffee shop surrounded by mood boards, fabric swatches, and spreadsheets. The air felt tense from the moment I arrived. Heather barely acknowledged my greeting, already deep in conversation with Elise about letterpress invitations. As the discussion progressed, I listened carefully, trying to find appropriate moments to contribute. When Elise mentioned the ceremony structure, I gently suggested incorporating a memory candle for my late husband Jake's father. "It would mean so much to have Tom acknowledged," I explained. "I still have his favorite tie that Jake could wrap around the candle holder." Heather's expression tightened. "We're going for a clean, modern aesthetic," she said. "Memorial elements are really not the vibe we want." I noticed Elise shift uncomfortably in her seat. Jake stared into his coffee cup. Next, I suggested including my mother's pearl hair clip in Heather's ensemble as her something borrowed. Before I could explain its sentimental value, Heather cut me off. "Rhonda," she said sharply, her voice rising enough to make nearby patrons glance our way. "This is my wedding. I need you to stay in your lane." The coffee shop seemed to go silent. Elise pretended to check her phone. Jake looked up, startled by Heather's tone, but said nothing. I felt blood rushing to my face as humiliation washed over me. Not only had Heather spoken to me like a misbehaving child, but she had done so in public, and my son had offered no defense. "I see," I said quietly, gathering my purse. My hands were shaking. "I think I should go." No one protested as I stood. Jake half rose from his chair but sat back down when Heather placed a hand on his arm. I walked out with as much dignity as I could muster, but once in my car, tears came immediately. The phrase, "stay in your lane," replayed in my head during the entire drive home. That evening, Jake called. I hoped for an apology, some acknowledgement of how inappropriate Heather's behavior had been. Instead, he offered excuses. "Mom, Heather's just stressed about the wedding," he said. "She's under a lot of pressure from her parents to make everything perfect." "Jake, she humiliated me in public," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was only trying to make suggestions that would make the day more meaningful. "I know, Mom, but this is really important to Heather. Could you maybe just go along with what she wants? For me, I really need your support right now." His words felt like a betrayal. The little boy I had comforted after nightmares, the teenager I had supported through heartbreaks, the young man I had guided through college decisions. He was now asking me to accept disrespect for his comfort. I ended the call promising to think about it. But what I was really thinking about was how much our relationship had changed. In the following week, Heather made no attempt to apologize. Instead, I received a series of texts about additional wedding expenses, upgraded linens, premium bar package, a videographer, in addition to the photographer. Each message felt transactional, as if I were simply a funding source rather than a mother with emotional investment in the event. "The venue needs another $5,000 for the upgraded catering package," one text read. "No greeting, no acknowledgement of our last interaction, just a financial demand." Another day, another text, "Flower budget needs to increase by $2,500 for the arrangements I want." Jake called occasionally, his tone cautious and placating. He never directly addressed the coffee shop incident, but would pepper our conversations with comments about how beautiful the wedding would be and how happy he was that I was contributing. Each call left me feeling more like a bank than a mother. On a rainy Sunday afternoon, I sat in my living room reviewing wedding expense spreadsheets that Heather had sent over. The numbers were staggering. Somehow what had started as a $45,000 budget had ballooned to nearly $75,000, with my contribution expected to cover most of it. As I scrolled through itemized lists of expenses, something inside me shifted. I began to see the pattern that had been developing since the engagement. I pulled out photo albums, flipping through pictures of Jake growing up. There he was missing front teeth on his 8th birthday, blowing out candles on a lopsided cake I had made. Another showed his high school graduation, his arm around my shoulder, as we both beamed with pride. In every important moment of his life, I had been there supporting and loving him unconditionally. Now, when he was taking this momentous step into marriage, I was being pushed aside, treated as an ATM rather than a parent. The realization was painful, but clarifying. Heather saw me as a resource to exploit, not family to embrace. More disturbing was Jake's willingness to let it happen. The son I had raised to be kind and respectful was standing by while his fiancée dismissed and diminished his mother. Perhaps I had failed him in some way, not teaching him to stand up for what's right when it's difficult. The next day, I called my closest friend Margaret, who had known Jake since he was a baby. Over coffee at her kitchen table, I poured out everything that had happened. Margaret listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "Rhonda," she said finally, "you need to take back your power here. This isn't just about a wedding anymore. It's about respect and boundaries." "But what about Jake?" I asked. "I don't want to damage our relationship." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Honey, that relationship is already being damaged, just not by you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your child is to show them there are consequences for allowing people to treat others poorly." Her words resonated deeply. I had spent so long trying to make things easier for Jake that I had enabled a situation that was unhealthy for all of us. By accepting Heather's treatment, I was tacitly telling both of them it was acceptable. That afternoon, I reviewed the wedding fund account details. The money was still in my name. I had been making transfers as needed for deposits, but hadn't gifted the entire sum yet. Legally and ethically, this was still my money earned through years of hard work. I had every right to reconsider how it was being used. After careful consideration, I developed a plan. I would withdraw $35,000 from the wedding fund, leaving $10,000 as a gift for the couple. This amount was still generous, but set clear boundaries about my role and expectations. I would explain my decision clearly to Jake without anger, but with firmness. This wasn't about punishing Heather. It was about standing up for myself and my value in my son's life. The next morning, I went to the bank and made the withdrawal. Then I wrote a letter to Jake explaining my decision. I wanted to ensure my thoughts were clear and not clouded by emotion during an in-person conversation. The letter was respectful but direct, detailing the pattern of dismissal I had experienced and my unwillingness to continue funding a celebration where I was not respected as the mother of the groom. I invited Jake to dinner that evening alone. He arrived looking wary, sensing something important was coming. After serving his favorite meal, beef stew that had always been his comfort food, I handed him the envelope containing my letter and a check for $10,000. "What's this?" he asked, confusion evident on his face. "Jake, I need you to read this before we talk," I said calmly. "It's important." His expression changed as he read, cycling through confusion, shock, and finally anger. When he finished, he looked up at me, his face flushed. "You can't do this," he said, his voice shaking. "We've already made deposits. Contracts are signed." "I can, and I have," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "If you want me to stay in my lane, as Heather put it, then this is my lane, my money, my choice." The fallout was immediate and intense. Within an hour of Jake leaving my house, my phone began buzzing with texts and calls from Heather. I let them go to voicemail, needing time to prepare for the confrontation I knew was coming. "How dare you pull this stunt 3 months before the wedding?" Heather's first voicemail was nearly unintelligible through her anger. We have contracts. People are counting on us. You can't just change your mind because your feelings are hurt." The second message took a different approach, her voice tearful now. "I thought we were going to be family. How could you do this to Jake? To us? This was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives." My phone also lit up with messages from Heather's parents. William sent a tersely worded text about legal obligations and verbal contracts, clearly trying to intimidate me. Patricia called to express her disappointment in my pettiness. Jake sent a simple text: "Heather is devastated. Please reconsider." No mention of his own feelings or any acknowledgement of my concerns. His priority was clear, and it wasn't his mother. The next evening, Jake and Heather arrived at my door unannounced. Heather's eyes were red from crying, but there was a hardness in her expression that belied any genuine remorse. Jake looked exhausted, standing slightly behind her, as if physically withdrawing from the conflict. "We need to talk about this," Heather said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You can't just pull the funding and expect us to figure it out." I gestured for them to sit in the living room. "I can make some tea," I offered, attempting to create at least a veneer of civility. "We don't want tea," Heather snapped. "We want an explanation and a solution." I took a deep breath. I explained my reasoning in the letter to Jake. I've been systematically excluded from wedding planning while being expected to foot the bill. I've been spoken to disrespectfully and publicly humiliated. The money I saved was a gift, not an obligation, and I've changed the terms of that gift based on how I've been treated. "So you're punishing us because your feelings are hurt," Heather said incredulously. "You're ruining our wedding because you couldn't control every detail." "I'm not trying to control anything," I replied. "In fact, I've respected your wishes to plan your wedding as you see fit. Now I'm asking you to respect my wish to spend my money as I see fit." Jake finally spoke up. "Mom, please. We can't afford the venue without your help. Everything will have to be canceled or changed." I looked at my son, truly looked at him, seeing not just my little boy, but the man who had allowed his mother to be disrespected repeatedly. "I'm sorry that's difficult, Jake, but as Heather so clearly stated, I need to stay in my lane, and my financial decisions are my lane." Word of my decision spread quickly through our extended family and social circle. The reactions were mixed. My sister called to tell me she was proud of me for finally standing up for yourself. My elderly aunt thought I was being selfish and forgetting that a mother's job is to sacrifice. Jake's godfather, who had been like a brother to my late husband, stopped by with a bottle of wine and told me, "Tom would have done the same thing. He never let anyone walk all over him or the people he loved." Jake's cousin Emily, who had always been close to him, called me in tears. "Jake's making a huge mistake with Heather," she confided. "None of us can stand her, but we've been afraid to say anything." "I'm glad you did." These varied reactions made me question my decision at times. Had I been too harsh? Should I have found another way to address the situation? Was I jeopardizing my relationship with my only child? The questions kept me awake at night, but in the morning I would remember Heather's dismissive tone, Jake's silence in the face of her behavior, and find my resolve strengthened again. Meanwhile, the wedding plans underwent significant changes. The Mountain View Resort was canceled, and a more modest venue in the city was booked instead. The guest list was further reduced. The designer dress Heather had selected was returned, and a sample sale gown was purchased instead. Heather's parents contributed more than they had initially planned, but made it clear they resented having to do so. Through mutual friends, I heard that the planning process had become tense and difficult. Heather and Jake argued frequently with Heather, blaming Jake for not handling his mother better. Jake, for his part, seemed increasingly unhappy and withdrawn. About a month after my decision, Jake came to see me alone. He looked tired with dark circles under his eyes and a slump to his shoulders that hadn't been there before. We sat in the kitchen, the scene of so many heartfelt conversations throughout his life. "Mom," he began hesitantly, "I need to ask you something honestly. Has Heather always treated you the way she did at that meeting with the wedding planner?" The question surprised me. "Not always," I answered truthfully. "In the beginning, things were good, but there have been many small incidents leading up to that day." Jake nodded slowly. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how I just sat there while she spoke to you that way." He looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have said something. I should have stopped it." His apology brought tears to my eyes. "Why didn't you?" I asked gently. "I don't know," he admitted. "At first I thought it was just wedding stress. Then it became easier to go along with what Heather wanted than to cause conflict. But lately," he trailed off. "Lately I've been seeing a side of her I'm not sure I can live with. She's been like this with the vendors, with her bridesmaids, even with her own mother. Nothing is ever good enough. No one else's feelings matter." He looked up, his eyes wet. "I don't know what to do, Mom. The wedding is in 2 months." It was the first real conversation we'd had since the engagement, the first time Jake had been honest about his doubts and fears. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Only you can decide what's right for your life, Jake. But remember that a wedding is one day. A marriage is a lifetime." The wedding day arrived on a crisp fall Saturday. The venue, a renovated historical building downtown, was tastefully decorated with seasonal flowers and candles. My role had been minimized to mother of the groom in the most traditional sense. I wore a conservative blue dress that Heather had approved and sat where I was told to sit. As I entered the venue, I felt the eyes of Heather's family on me, their judgment palpable. Patricia, in her designer outfit, gave me a cold nod. William pretended not to see me. I held my head high, reminding myself that I had nothing to be ashamed of. The ceremony was brief and formal. Jake looked handsome in his suit, but strained around the eyes. When he saw me in the family gathering area before the processional, he came over and hugged me tightly. "I'm glad you're here, Mom," he whispered. "I'm sorry for everything." During the reception, I played my part graciously. I smiled for photos, made polite conversation with guests, and avoided any interaction that might cause tension. I had given Jake and Heather a set of heirloom crystal glasses that had belonged to my grandparents as a wedding gift, along with the $10,000 check. It was more than generous given the circumstances. As the evening progressed, I noticed Jake watching Heather with an expression I'd never seen before, something like wariness mixed with resignation. She held court with her friends, barely acknowledging him unless it was time for another ritualized moment that the photographer needed to capture. During the mother-son dance, Jake held my hand tightly and whispered, "You were right, Mom, about everything." I left the reception early, pleading fatigue. As I hugged Jake goodbye, he held on longer than necessary. "He'll call you tomorrow," he said. It felt like both a promise and a plea. The months following the wedding were difficult. Jake and Heather settled into a luxury apartment that her parents had helped furnish. Our phone calls became less frequent, and when we did talk, Jake seemed guarded, carefully choosing his words. I invited them to Sunday dinners, but Heather always had a reason they couldn't attend. When Jake occasionally stopped by the bakery alone, he would mention tensions at home, but quickly changed the subject when I asked for details. Christmas was particularly revealing. They spent the actual holiday with Heather's family at a ski resort, but Jake came to my house the weekend before. As we decorated the tree with ornaments he'd made as a child, he confided that Heather had criticized the homemade gifts he'd planned to give her. "She said she expects real presents, not craft projects," he said quietly, hanging a salt dough star he had made in 2nd grade. "She doesn't understand that not everything valuable comes with a price tag." In February, about 6 months after the wedding, everything changed. Jake called me late one night, his voice tight with anger and hurt. "Can I come over?" he asked. "I need to talk to you." He arrived at my door with a small suitcase and red-rimmed eyes. Over tea at my kitchen table, he told me what had happened. Heather had been going through their bank statements and discovered he'd been sending me money to help with some unexpected bakery repairs. "She completely lost it," Jake explained. "Said I was betraying her by helping you without consulting her first. Said my loyalty should be to her, not to you." He took a shaky breath. "Then she said something I can't get out of my head. She said your mother isn't family anymore. I'm your family now." "Oh, Jake," I said softly, my heart breaking for him. I told her that wasn't how family works, that there isn't a limited amount of love to go around. His voice cracked. We argued for hours. Eventually, I just needed to get out of there, to think. Jake stayed with me for a week, during which Heather alternated between angry texts and tearful pleas for him to return. He spent hours on the phone with her, but seemed more resolved with each conversation. "I keep thinking about how she treated you," he told me one evening. "How I let her treat you. And I realize that's a pattern I can't live with for the next 40 years. Eventually, Jake moved back to the apartment, but something fundamental had shifted. He began standing up to Heather, refusing to let her isolate him from family and friends. He insisted on weekly dinners with me, with or without her. He rejoined the community softball league shed deemed a waste of time. Most importantly, he started therapy to understand why he'd allowed himself to be controlled for so long. Their marriage lasted another 8 months before Jake moved out permanently. The divorce was contentious, but relatively quick, as they had no children and had been married less than 2 years. Heather's parents hired an aggressive lawyer who tried to claim part of Jake's retirement accounts, but the judge ruled against them. The beautiful crystal glasses I had given them as a wedding present were returned to me broken, which felt symbolic of the entire relationship. Throughout this difficult period, I focused on healing and rebuilding my own life. The pain and rejection I had experienced during the wedding planning had left deeper scars than I initially realized. With encouragement from Margaret, I joined a support group for parents navigating difficult family dynamics. The stories I heard there helped me understand I wasn't alone in my experiences. My bakery became my sanctuary. I expanded the business, adding cooking classes and a small cafe section. The work kept my hands and mind busy during the darkest days and eventually became a source of renewed pride and purpose. Customers who had heard rumors about the wedding drama went out of their way to show support, and business actually improved. Jake and I rebuilt our relationship slowly. We had to have difficult conversations about why he had allowed Heather to come between us and why I hadn't spoken up sooner about how I was being treated. There were tears and uncomfortable silences, but also moments of profound understanding and forgiveness. I learned to set boundaries without fear of losing him, and he learned to respect those boundaries while finding his own voice. 2 years after the wedding fund drama, Jake and I took a trip together to the coast, just the two of us. As we walked along the beach one evening, he turned to me and said, "You know what I realized, Mom? When you took back the wedding fund, you were teaching me something important about self-respect. It just took me a while to learn the lesson. Today, my life is full and satisfying in ways I couldn't have imagined during that painful time." Jake has met someone new, a kind kindergarten teacher named Alicia, who treats both him and me with genuine warmth and respect. My bakery continues to thrive, and I've even been featured in a regional cooking magazine. Most importantly, I've learned that loving someone doesn't mean accepting disrespect, and that sometimes the strongest act of love is setting a clear boundary. Looking back on the wedding fund incident, I don't regret my decision. By choosing to stay in my lane, I taught my son the value of self-respect and showed him that true family relationships are built on mutual respect and consideration, not financial transactions. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the most valuable ones, both for ourselves and for those we love. Life has a way of teaching us its most important lessons through our most painful experiences. For me, taking back that wedding fund wasn't about the money. It was about reclaiming my dignity and showing my son what healthy boundaries look like. I wonder, have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect your self-respect in a family situation? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about navigating family relationships. Remember, sometimes staying in your lane means defining what that lane is for yourself. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to stand up for yourself when it matters most.